On April 6th, 1966, the Beatles walked into EMI Recording Studios, now affectionately known as Abbey Road Studios, and they silently began to change the world as we know it with the recording of their masterpiece album, Revolver. There was no announcement, there was no press release, there was no grand reveal, just simply the beginning of something different. This is Vinyl Riffs with Sean Gaylord. Let's drop the needle on this 60th anniversary of the beginning of the recording of the Beatles album Revolver. Let's tune in to what the Revolver Effect is, and I'm also going to share with you why this album matters so much to me 60 years later from its recording. This album, Revolver, was a turning point. It just wasn't music history. It was simply a major pivot and shift in the Beatles' recording career. If you remember, and if you've been following Beatles history, the year previous, you had and not even a year, basically December of 1965, the Beatles release another turning point album, Rubber Soul. Here we are, barely half a year later, with the beginning of a grand, giant leap, a giant step into music history, pop history, rock history, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the Beatles stopped trying to recreate what worked, and they broke away and did something innovative, creative, and groundbreaking. Today, on April 6, 1966, the Beatles recorded, or began recording rather, a John song, a song that was roughly entitled Mark One. We later know it as Tomorrow Never Knows, which is the closing track to this pivotal 1966 album. And in this track, they started recording what was possible. They attempted to basically go into the mindset of Revolver with the fact that we're not going to recreate this album on stage, and we are also going to try to pursue new new sounds, new forms of expression. And basically that mindset is captured in take one of Mark One, which later becomes Tomorrow Never Knows. I really relate to this album, and I always have for many, many, many years. In particular, the Revolver album, it's a transitional album. It's a liminal album. And it's an album that kind of echoes my current season, being in between, being at a bit of a crossroads, and looking forward to the next chapter, the next season in my life. And the Beatles are doing this as well. They know they're on the verge of something. They know that they are getting fatigued with touring and the whole Beatlemania cycle, treadmill, hamster wheel that they were on. And they were beginning to branch out. Also on this album, you hear the four Beatles beginning to form their own individual identities, and taking the sum of those various parts and melding them into something new, into something different, into something bold. Having listened to this album and I've written about this album. I touch upon Revolver in my book, The Pepper Effect. I thought about, now that we are in the 60th anniversary of this album, Revolver, an album that oftentimes gets lost in the translation between, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Abbey Road, these kind of two pillar albums. And of course, you've got the White Album and Rubber Soul, but Revolver is very unique. Is is an album that stands out in just a little bit of a different way. Um, I thought about, just like in the Pepper Effect, um, how we could approach this album through the lens of leadership, creativity, collaboration, and innovation. The Pepper Effect, for those of you who've read that book, know that I came up with four riffs, or four variables that make this mindset for doing great and bold and creative things. And the Pepper Effect was simply, I call them the four riffs. Believe in your masterpiece, believe in your vision, believe in your collaborators, and ignore the naysayers. And I thought, upon reflecting on this album, I thought, what would be a Revolver Effect? What would be those riffs that make this album so unique? I mean, this is an album that has songs that are now part of our canon, that are now standards. Songs like Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine, Got to Get You Into My Life, For No One, Taxman, Tomorrow Never Knows. All of these songs. I mean, it's just a great pop album. And each album, or excuse me, each song on the album is a mini universe in and of itself. And I thought, well, what would be a lens or an approach to making our own kind of Revolver? What would be one way to lead like the Beatles, or to lead like George Martin, who was the producer for this album? What are kind of some relevant landing points that we can take from the creation of this album, and how can we apply it to the lens of our own gig, whether it's a leadership position, whether we're a collaborator, whether we're an artist or a musician, whatever industry that you're in. And so I came up with four riffs, and I'll share those right now. Believe in the courage to experiment. Revolver is very much an experimental album. Believe in the craft, and there's great artistry, within the scope and sequence of this album. Believe in expanding your voice. And as I mentioned, the Beatles began to push the boundaries of songwriting, and begin to bring in, classical instruments, more Indian instruments, loops and backwards guitars, and those things. And then the fourth riff is believe in reinvention through letting go. And very much so, this album is a step forward, is a quantum leap into the unknown for the Beatles. I will be riffing individually on each of the four riffs of the Revolver Effect through the course of a four-part series for the Vinyl Riffs podcast. And I also intend to write a companion blog piece for each of the riffs. All of this, of course, is in celebration and in honor of an album that truly is a masterpiece, and stands as a quantum leap, a giant step into something new and bold that has such a tremendous impact on pop music and rock music and so many musicians. So the Revolver Effect is not about the album per se. It's about what happens when we choose to evolve. It's about what happens when we choose to listen to our own voice and develop the belief and the courage to innovate and to do something new and different and bold. So this is Sean Gaylord with Vinyl Riffs. I look forward to being on this journey with you in the Revolver Effect. And I'm also interested in your Revolver story. So please be sure, drop me a line, drop me a blurb or an email. I'd love to connect with you to hear how this album has impacted you and inspired you along the way. So feel free to either leave that in the comments of the various platforms on which this podcast is available. You're also welcome to drop me a line via my two main social media channels, Instagram and LinkedIn. And of course, you can email me at sgaylord84@gmail.com. I'll put all that contact information in the show notes for this podcast. But in the meantime, keep listening, keep spinning, keep believing, and of course, happy birthday to the Revolver album.